DeMarcus then began arguing with Abriel and used some very, very derogatory language that I won't repeat at all, and all kinds of profanity. He was calling her a and all kinds of other stuff, and stated that he was going to her and that he was going to quote baby too.
Abilene 911.
Hello?
Abilene 911, go ahead.
I accidentally killed somebody.
You think you killed somebody?
No, I know I did. My sister.
Okay, where's your sister now?
She's in the bed.
Is she breathing?
No, I looked. I feel so messed up.
Okay, calm down, okay? I want you to stay on the phone with me, okay?
She was standing in my desk and came up behind and started with you, and then she fell down screaming at me.
And then he some more. When he was some more, was it, where was he her?
Okay.
23-year-old mother of two is dead after being by her own brother on Christmas Eve. Abriel Baldwin was trying to break up an argument between her siblings when one of them pulled out a...
This is a particularly tragic story for so many different reasons. Not only was the innocent victim a young mom leaving behind two little boys, but she was killed by her own brother, who was just a child himself. But not only that, her murder took place during one of the times of the year that is supposed to be about love, family, and gratitude. Instead, Abriel Baldwin was murdered as a result of pure jealousy. Pinellas County Sheriff Bob Galtieri was visibly angry and frustrated as he addressed the press to tell them the story.
All right, so we're here this morning to talk about a homicide that happened here in Largo on Christmas Eve, December 24th at about 1:45 p.m. The victim in the homicide is Abriel Baldwin, a 23-year-old black female. Her date of birth is May 5th of 2000. She went by the name of Bree and was a mom to two boys, a 6-year-old and an 11-month-old.
Abriel was just an innocent bystander of an argument that broke out between her two brothers, DeMarcus and Darkus.
The first person that was arrested is DeMarcus Coley. He's a 14-year-old black male. Date of birth is May 2nd, 2009. And he's been charged with first-degree murder, child abuse, and being a delinquent in possession of a firearm.
What was a 14-year-old child doing with a firearm, you may be wondering? Others are asking the same question.
The second is Darkus Coley. He's a 15-year-old black male. Date of birth is January 31st, 2008. And his charges are attempted first-degree murder and tampering with physical evidence.
So this is what happened. On Christmas Eve, Abriel Baldwin went shopping with her own two young sons, her mother Joyce, and her two teen brothers, when all of a sudden an argument fueled by jealousy began.
Darkus was jealous that their mother Joyce was getting 14-year-old DeMarcus more gifts than he was receiving. So they had this family spat about who was getting what and what money was being spent on who, and they're having this big thing going on in the store, and they're all arguing with each other.
So there is the argument at the store, and then the family ends up heading over to their grandmother's house, where things get even more heated between DeMarcus and Darkus. DeMarcus then decides to take things to a whole nother level.
So this is just normal what people do when they have these young kids getting spats like this. And of course I'm saying this sarcastically because he's all mad at his brother about what his brother was getting and is not getting. He stood in the doorway and he took out his .40 caliber semi-automatic handgun and he pointed it at Darkus and told him he was going to him in the head.
At that point, Darkus has no weapon on him, and he didn't want the altercation to go any further.
So DeMarcus tries to get Darkus to fight. Darkus said he didn't want to fight and told him to get out of the house and he didn't want anything to do with him.
Then one of his uncles, who was in the home, in hopes of giving one a chance to cool off, led DeMarcus outside and away from Darkus. At that point, Abriel went out to talk to DeMarcus and told him to stop trying to start things with his brother. After all, it was Christmas. Abriel was carrying her baby in her arms at the time.
DeMarcus then began arguing with Abriel and used some very, very derogatory language that I won't repeat at all, and all kinds of profanity. He was calling her a and all kinds of other stuff, and stated that he was going to her and that he was going to quote baby too.
What kind of of monster threatens to kill his own sister and baby nephew? This is clearly one messed up teenager with no morals of any kind. DeMarcus ended up firing at Abriel in the chest, even though she had only been trying to break up the argument. She was still holding her baby at the time. Abriel and the baby then fell to the ground. When 15-year-old Darkus comes out of the house and sees what happened, he grabs his own weapon. Darkus then fired at DeMarcus in response, hitting him in the stomach. At that point, DeMarcus no longer had possession of his weapon, which meant that Darkus just shot an unarmed person. Darkus, maybe realizing what he had just done, made a run for it and hid out at a relative's house, where he was later found and arrested. Meanwhile, Abriel was rushed to the hospital for treatment, but sadly later died. DeMarcus was also treated for his injuries, and then he was arrested too. Both of the teens are facing some very serious charges, and this is yet another recent incident within the United States that is bringing up the conversation of violence and kids getting access to weapons that they should have never been around in the first place. But that's not all. DeMarcus has bragged about owning a firearm before. In fact, it was the same firearm that he would later use on his own sister.
DeMarcus, again the 14-year-old, recently posted a photo to Snapchat pointing that he used to kill his sister at the camera. So this is within the last couple days, and this is a Snapchat photo. That's DeMarcus pointing that, which is this, which we recovered there at the scene.
These are two teens who have barely even started their lives, and now they are looking at spending major time behind bars. It'll be very interesting to see how this whole tragic case plays out through the legal system in what can only be a very controversial trial. Charity Lee was a hardworking mother of two from Texas. Her upbringing had its fair share of challenges, but she was determined to make sure that her two children, 13-year-old Paris and 4-year-old Ella, had a good life. She worked hard to provide for them and keep their home as happy and stable as possible. But in February of 2007, Charity's life as she knew it changed forever when she received what is probably some of the worst news that any mother could ever imagine. She still remembers that day clearly. Her two children had been at home with a babysitter, and she was working a long shift to bring home some extra money, when all of a sudden, law enforcement arrived.
It was Super Bowl Sunday. I hate football. Around midnight, cops are at the front door. They went to the manager's office. They called my name. They told me that my daughter had been hurt. And I was like, you need to take me to Ellen now. And they were like, you can't go. And I'm like, what do you mean I can't go? You just told me that she's hurt. She needs her mother. And then they said, well, she's dead.
Charity's first thought was that there was no way that this could be true. She had left her kids safe at home with someone to watch them. Surely some sort of mistake had been made.
That made no sense, because I left her at home with her brother and a babysitter. And so I said, is my son okay? And they said, we have him. Then where is he? That's when everything stopped making sense.
What she didn't know was that her son Paris had convinced the babysitter to head home early that day. And after she had left, Paris decided to do the unthinkable to his little sister, murder her in cold blood. Earlier that day, local dispatch received this disturbing 911 call from a young boy. The caller is Paris Benet, and what he claims to have done is just jaw-dropping.
Abriel 911.
Hello?
Abriel 911, go ahead.
I actually killed somebody.
You think you killed somebody?
No, I know I did. My sister.
Okay, where's your sister now?
She's in the bed.
Is she breathing?
No, I looked. I feel so messed up.
Okay, calm down, okay? I want you to stay on the phone with me, okay?
Law enforcement would soon arrive at the home, where they discovered a bloody, gruesome scene. Ella was lying dead on her bed, her murder weapon alongside her. Meanwhile, Charity is still processing the horrific news that she had just been told. Her daughter is dead. Her instinct as a mother is concerned for her other child, Paris. But when she asks law enforcement if Paris is okay, that's when she finds out even more horrible news. Paris was the one who killed Ella. Charity rushed rushed back home, and it was like she was living in a movie, or maybe even her worst nightmare. She was allowed to see her daughter's face, but Ella no longer looked like the little girl she knew and loved.
There was police everywhere, news trucks, neighbors. The entire street was lit up. She was in a body bag, of course. It was zipped up to her chin. She had blood coming out of her mouth.
While in a state of shock, Charity was then allowed to see Paris. He seemed cold and calm, and when she hugged him, he did not hug her back. But despite what he had done, Charity still loved Paris and wanted him to get help. It wasn't that she didn't think he deserved to go to prison for what he did, but she also believed he needed treatment if anything better was ever to come out of his life.
After Paris killed his sister, I was not trying to get Paris off. I wanted to get Paris help and try to get my kid into a mental institution. Especially as a minor, I felt like they needed to figure out what was wrong with them, not just lock him up and throw away the key.
So how does a 13-year-old kid get to the point where he decides to kill his own sister? Were there signs going back from years before that would have hinted at him being unstable? And then there's the biggest question of all. What was his motive? When Paris's grandmother reflects back on what he was like as a little kid, she remembers things that he did, and looking back now, surely they could have been red flags. But at the time, nobody had recognized them. Throughout her life, Paris's mother Charity struggled with addiction. She ended up getting sober and wanted to be the best mother possible for her children, but sadly relapsed when Paris was 12 and Ella was 3.5. Could there have been signs that Paris was struggling that had been overlooked because his family was going through their own issues at the time?
Paris would pound his head against the wall till it would bleed, or he had thrown glass all over the place. I guess he was screeching for help, but we just didn't pay any attention. We were so caught up in our own turmoil that Paris just kind of got left to the wayside. But I always thought he would take it out on Charity. I never dreamed he would take it out on Ella.
Charity knew that Paris was different from the other kids. He was incredibly intelligent and very gifted for his age.
Paris was a ridiculously smart kid. He has an IQ of 142.
He was always artistic, creative. He started to draw when he was 3.
It wasn't like he was a perfectly behaved child, though. He still acted out sometimes, like all kids do, and Charity had been worried about his reaction when Paris found out that he would no longer be an only child. Sure enough, Paris was not excited about the news that his mother was pregnant. This could have been because he would no longer have his mother to himself the way he had been used to, and the attention would shift onto someone else. But still, Charity thought that by the time Ella was born, that he had seemed to warm up to the idea and was excited about having a sibling.
I mean, he would tell lies sometimes, yeah. He would throw temper tantrums sometimes, yeah. And Paris was not happy when I was pregnant with Ella. And I was concerned. But the day that Ella was born, he fell in love.
But sadly, it would later turn out that Paris had not fully gotten over the jealousy he felt towards his sister. In fact, he still felt so strongly that he had been willing to do whatever it took to get her out of the picture altogether. According to Charity's mother, the day that Ella was killed was not the first time that Paris had been violent before. Just around a year before the murder, Paris had been violent towards Charity and even tried to attack her. They ended up having to take him to a special facility to get treatment and were worried that his behavior could get worse.
Paris tried to Charity at the house one day. So we took him to a psychiatric place up in Wichita Falls. Charity wouldn't let me go with her to pick him up. And I never even found this out until after Ella was murdered and we were talking with the police. But the psychiatrists up there had evaluated Paris, and they had told Charity that he had homicidal tendencies.
But Charity didn't leave Paris at the treatment center. Instead, she chose to take him back home. Maybe Charity didn't want to believe that her son could truly be homicidal. Or maybe she thought that leaving him at the treatment facility would do him more harm than good. But since, she has come to terms with the fact that rethinking her decision to take Paris home from treatment isn't going to reverse what happened and bring Ella back.
I believe it was November of 2006. And then Ella died February of 2007. I feel like even if Paris had stayed at that place, it wouldn't have helped him. I don't know, I can't spend a whole lot of time anymore double guessing the past.
After Paris murdered Ella, some wondered if he was mentally insane. At first, he tried to act like he was crazy, likely because he thought it would keep him out of trouble. He said he was having hallucinations at the time he killed his sister, and that when he looked at her, all he saw was a giant pumpkin head, not her actual face. But this ended up to be not true at all, and Paris was arrested the same night that he killed Ella and charged with her murder. Ella's autopsy results would be even more heartbreaking. They showed that Paris didn't just kill her, but attacked her over and over again, causing her to suffer. It was an awful, horrific death. Paris was charged as a juvenile because he was just 13 years old at the time. He ended up pleading guilty to capital murder. However, Texas law does not allow someone who commits a crime when they are a juvenile to be sentenced to life behind bars. So instead, Paris was sentenced to 40 years in prison. But here's the catch. He was given a possibility of parole after 20 years. So this means if the court finds it fit, Paris could be a free man again by the year 2027, which is not long at all. But is that actually enough time for him to have been fully rehabilitated? It could still be a few years before we know whether or not Paris will be released early, or if the court will decide that he should live out the rest of his sentence in prison. Meanwhile, Charity continues to visit him in prison, but that doesn't mean she thinks he should ever be free. Charity now has another young child, whom she believes would be in danger if Paris was ever released. She also thinks that it's possible that Paris could try to hurt her as well. Instead of spending her time wondering what she could have done differently or trying to figure out what made Paris turn out the way he did, Charity has instead tried to do something more valuable in order to honor Ella.
The night that Ella died, I made her a promise that something meaningful would come out of her death.
I tell myself that it's okay to enjoy life, but there's always that thought in the back of my mind, well, Ella's not here to enjoy it with me. So I set up the Ella Foundation to prevent violence by sharing our story.
Charity has never stopped keeping Ella's memory alive by sharing her story and talking about what Ella was like during her short 4 years of life.
She was bossy, extremely opinionated, but very, very loving. She had it in her mind that we had to adopt half of her pre-kindergarten class because they would tell her that they got into a fight with their mom or something.
Charity says that Paris has had the chance to meet his other sibling, her young son, but she is very cautious when the two are around each other.
I try to keep everything as benign as possible. I don't want to do anything that's going to make Paris want to hurt him. I mean, I really believe that part of the motivation behind murdering Ella was to have his mother all to himself. And he had that again for 8 straight years. So I don't sit and go, oh, wow, this is so nice. They're getting along so well. I sit and I listen to what Paris says.
As for Paris, he says he does regret what he did and regrets destroying the family he once had. He knows that nothing will ever undo the pain and hurt that he has caused.
I miss my family. I miss the family that I had, that I tore apart. And so not only am I missing it, there's guilt and remorse mixed in with that, because not only I didn't do something stupid and get locked away, and that's why I'm missing my family. I did something that tore my family apart and took me away from them. And it's something that I can't fix, ever. And that's what I miss the most.
Do you think that Paris will ever be considered rehabilitated enough to be released from prison? Let us know what you think in the comments.
wanted to kill everyone at the house first.
Okay.
And then wait for all the packages to show up over the weekend.
This is the story of teen killers Robert and Michael Bever. These two teens are from Broken Arrow, Oklahoma, and are from a family of 7 children. They lived a very sheltered life where they were homeschooled by their parents and spent little time around other kids their age besides their siblings. While their parents were extremely protective of them, they did allow the older boys to go on the internet. For Robert especially, the internet seemed to be a way for him to escape his sheltered life and explore what else was out there. He liked looking up movies, cars, and sports. He also liked to spend time filming little videos and posting them online. He shared this with Michael, and the two would often do these things together.
I'm going to make my first sketch soon. Can't show you a sneak preview or it would ruin it. It'll be like a minute long. It's going to be some good stuff. I think it's going to be hilarious.
For the most part, the way that Robert and Michael used the internet was pretty similar to other teens their age at first. But as time went on, their interests took a very dark and disturbing turn. They both became fascinated with serial killers, particularly people like Ted Bundy and the Columbine school shooters. But they didn't just want to learn about these people, they wanted to be like them. They idolized them and looked up to them in a very creepy and disturbing way. Robert and Michael began to come up with this fantasy of becoming serial killers themselves one day. They wanted to become famous and outdo other killers who came before them by breaking records for the number of people that they killed. And so they decided to come up with a horrific plan to make this happen. Robert and Michael decided that they would first kill their entire family and then go on to kill as many other people as they could. Maybe this at first started as just something they made up, like a fantasy and not something they were ever going to actually follow through with. But as time went on, it became more and more real. They ended up using the internet to order the supplies that they would need to carry out the murders. Once that was done, they knew they would have to follow through with their plan, or their parents would see the shipment come and realize what they planned to do.
All the ammunition, he didn't want them to see that. So he killed him the day before the ammunition came out.
The teens carried out the murder spree on July 22nd of 2015. It was late at night when they gathered their weapons and began. They had planned to kill their father, David, first.
Because they were supposed to be like quiet.
Yeah, I was supposed to. And then I would go upstairs and David, Dad. And the guy with my pistol crossbow would kill him.
But at that time, David was sleeping on a different level of the home than the rest of the family. They thought that killing him and then the others would be too difficult, so they instead picked their 13-year-old sister, Crystal Bever, as their first victim. Michael lured Crystal into the room that he and Robert shared. Then Robert attacked her over and over again with a sharp blade. There was a slit in her throat and severe wounds to her stomach and arms. Despite how badly she was hurt, Crystal didn't die right away like they had expected her to. After they had left the room to go look for more victims, she began screaming and calling to her dad for help. At that point, the brothers came across their mother, 45-year-old April. Robert killed her as Michael watched.
Well, she was standing in my desk and came up behind and saw it with you, and then she fell down screaming.
And then he her some more. When he was her some more, where was he having her?
Michael then killed their 2 youngest siblings, 10-year-old Christopher and 5-year-old Victoria, who had been hiding in the bathroom after hearing the screams of their other family members. The middle child, 12-year-old Daniel, attempted to save his own life and the lives of his other family members by running to the room where the phone was and calling 911. But tragically, Michael rushed in and stopped him before he had the chance to speak to the dispatcher. After Michael ripped the phone away, Robert killed Daniel too. The last to go was David. The father of 7 had heard the screams and woken up. Disoriented, he ran down the stairs to see what was going on when Robert lunged at him. Robert brutally attacked his dad again and again until he was sure he was dead.
So everybody that you killed and every single that you inflicted, we're going to know about. And this is your last chance to just kind of let us know, to be honest, to man up and tell us exactly what you did and start making it right.
The brothers had one last person they hadn't attacked yet, their baby sister, Autumn. But before they could get to her, their sadistic plan was finally interrupted by a knock at the door. What the brothers hadn't realized was that their sister, Crystal, had managed to drag her battered body out to the driveway, where she began to scream for help. The neighbors had heard her and called 911. When law enforcement came and knocked at the door, both Bever brothers dashed out the back way of the home and hid in the surrounding woods. With the help of dogs, dogs, law enforcement were able to track them down and arrest them a short while later. Both brothers were charged with 5 counts of first-degree murder. The only 2 people in their family they hadn't managed to kill were baby Autumn, who was unarmed, and Crystal, who managed to survive her injuries. Robert pled guilty to all the charges against him, while Michael's attorney argued that Michael's charges should be dismissed because he had allegedly been abused both emotionally and physically in his home. However, this was never proven to be true.
Now, Robert Bever still has 10 days to change his plea. His attorneys do not believe that will happen. His younger brother, Michael's attorneys, filed a motion to dismiss his charges today, but a judge did uphold a not guilty plea for him.
Some believe that this whole plan had all been Robert's idea, and Michael had just gone along with it, something that Robert later admitted.
He says, for a long time, the plan wasn't real. It was just something he thought about to make himself feel better. Robert went through the entire chain of events of that night in detail. This was back in July of 2015. He talked about how it started, how it ended, taking responsibility for every death.
But both Robert and Michael were ultimately found to be guilty. For Robert, the sentence was not a surprise. He was 18 years old, so he was an adult at the time of the crime. Because of this, he was sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole.
So to give him life without parole, they would have had to find that he is beyond any hope of rehabilitation for the rest of his life. And the juror said they did not find that. So that is why they chose a sentence of life, 5 different counts of life for the 2 fathers and the 3 siblings in this case.
But did Michael deserve the same fate? He was only 16 years old at the time of the murders. Was there any chance that he could ever be rehabilitated enough that he would no longer pose a threat to society? Many believed the answer was no. But ultimately, the decision that was made was for Michael to be sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after he serves at least 18% of his sentence. This came as a shock to some.
Michael Bever initially smiled. He also wiped a tear from his eyes, as did his attorneys. The closing arguments before they went into deliberations, very emotional on both sides as they both tried to fight for their side. Of course, the DA said Michael Bever never deserves to get out of prison ever.
Realistically, there is a good chance that Michael will never be granted parole. Do you think this is fair? Let us know your opinion in the comments. These tragic stories go to show that even teenagers can be capable of doing the unthinkable when given the chance, and mere moments of violence and hatred can destroy families forever. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more.